Welcome to, yes, our third annual Greater LA Food Rescue Workshop. My name is Jessica Aldridge. I am the Director of Sustainability and Zero Waste Programs for Athens Services, and I also manage Athens food recovery efforts across our whole portfolio. We're honored, yes, as Michelle was saying, to be hosting today's workshop in partnership with the City of Los Angeles, LA Sanitation under their Recycla program. And again, a very big thank you to Ellie Plate and Allison Schill for making this workshop a reality year after year. All the hard work, hundreds of hours, really dedicated to make this a success. So if you get a moment to talk to Allison outside of this or today, just give her a huge thank you. We could not do it without her. If you don't know who Athens Services is, we are a family-owned and operated company since 1957, and we service 50 plus communities in Southern California. We do not collect edible food. So when we're talking about this, we have these great relationships with food recovery partners that sometimes that's a misnomer and people think we're collecting edible food. We are not. However, what we do is that we collect and process recyclables. We turn your food scraps into compost, and we try to minimize the amount of material that's heading to the landfill. So we are the company that's coming around collecting your materials and finding out how they can be best processed. As you will hear soon, the state of California, and you probably already know this, passed Senate Bill 1383, and that goes into effect on January 1st. And a part of that bill is to target the recovery of edible food, why we're here today. So that edible food that would have gone to landfill, meaning that there's certain businesses, not all of them that are mandated, but certain businesses that are considered edible food generators have to donate the maximum amount of edible food that they would have otherwise thrown away. And as many of you already know, this staggering statistic that in Los Angeles County alone, 1 in 4 residents are struggling with food insecurity and the lack to reliable access to sufficient quantity of affordable, nutritious food. That's wrong. And Athens believes in feeding people, not landfills. So it's vital for Athens Services to ensure that our businesses we serve understand how to participate in the recovery of edible food. We work with our contracted cities, and many cities are here today to help them identify the partnerships and the best practices to support SB 1383 compliance, in addition to food recovery efforts as well. And in partnership with LA Sanitation, we have developed a 4-part integrated program to support food rescue in our designated zones. And we service Harbor, West LA, and North Central in the city of Los Angeles for their commercial and multifamily waste services. And so this 4-part integrated program that we do is, with our partners, we are able to financially support the collection and distribution of food. We do infrastructure grants to grow food recovery specifically in the zones that we service. And we provide in-kind service of things like organics collection. And last words, not to make it too long, I just want to say that I felt honored to be working alongside food recovery organizations for the past 5 years, listening and learning and creating partnerships. And I look forward to what is to come of today. Athens Services and LA Sanitation decided that this ongoing workshop is something that is crucially important to disseminate information in a way that is digestible and relevant, not a top-down sort of from the state telling you what's going on, and to connect people and services. I hope that you can connect with each other today, connect with the businesses and the cities that are on this call, use the Remo feature, move around the tables. And, we want to provide that support to organizations and businesses and other cities, not just the city of Los Angeles. So in closing, I want to say thank you from Athens Services for being here today. And I hope that you find this workshop helpful. Thank you so much. And Allison, I'll trade it to you.
Thank you. It's such a great adventure going on this journey of trying to figure out how to comply with SB 1383, trying to figure out how to unify all of the messaging and trying to figure out how to benefit the the many nonprofit organizations that have the capacity to rescue food and feed hungry people, as well as nonprofit organizations that might be able to rescue food for volunteer events that would also be able to help out with that food diversion that we're looking for. Um, I wanted to talk a little bit about you guys today. So there's 98 people here right now, and if you feel comfortable, please introduce yourself in the general chat. Just drop a little note and message and say what organization you're working for and what you're hoping to get out of this workshop today. And while you're doing that, I'm going to explain a little bit about how this event works, and then I'm going to give you a little bit of a background about SB 1383 and what that means for those of you who are new to hearing about it. So don't be shy. Drop a note in the chat. And so this event is held virtually. It will be back in person someday, but right now it's on Remo. And Remo is a platform that allows us to almost have the same type of experience of meeting people and jumping around to different breakout tables and having these presentations as if it were a virtual event. The only difference is we can't give you food. So I'm sorry about that. I wish we could. But if you want to know about the agenda for today, in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, there's a little action thing, and then a list that is the agenda. The agenda is what you can follow today to speakers that we have, the presentations that we're going to have. Our first presentation is going to be a panel of several nonprofit organizations that are currently working in food recovery and having negotiations for contracts for SB 1383. And the second discussion we're going to be having is we're going to have the Sprouts has a really great sustainability expert that's going to tell us about corporate food donation programs that she has created. And after that, we're going to have a little 10-minute break, followed by a presentation from Burbank Recycle Center, Amy has, about government readiness. And then finally, we will have 1 hour of breakout sessions, which will have 10 different topics to choose from, as well as some tables for free chat, where we're all encouraged to introduce ourselves and to meet and to network, and then to also talk about various topics that many of us have a lot of interest in learning about. After 20 minutes, we'll jump over from one breakout table to the next. And you do that by double clicking on a table on an empty seat. If there's no empty seat, you can join another table that does have an empty seat and wait for the next breakout session to try and join that table again. And then after 3 breakout sessions, we will have our final thoughts, invitations, announcements, and then we will have a free chat for about 55 minutes where we can just continue the conversations that we were having during the breakout sessions, continue the questions that we had for our presenters, and meet one another and learn a little bit more about everything that's going on there. So I'm glad that you guys are introducing yourselves. Thank you so much. I want to tell you a little bit about SB 1383. For those of you who don't know, it's a bill that was passed, I think, in 2016, and it starts effectively in January 1st of 2022. And what it states is that we need to get organics out of the landfill to prevent one of the worst greenhouse gases, which is methane, from going into our atmosphere. And we do that by aiming for a collective target across California of 75% organic waste diversion by 2025. And that includes an increase in food waste, edible food waste diversion and donation collectively across the entire state by 20% of 2018 levels. And it has some direct requirements of commercial edible food generators, and they've separated them out into 2 tiers. So starting in January 1st, 2022, tier 1s, who are wholesale distributors of food, grocers, supermarkets, and food services will have to start donating food. And in 2024, January 1st, it goes to tier 2, which certain size restaurants and event venues, hotels, educational facilities, healthcare and hospitals, and then different state facilities as well will have to start donating food. And to do that, you'll need to have a written agreement or contract where the donor and the receiver of the food enter into some sort of a negotiation where it could include how much food is going to be generated, what kind of food, what the requirements are for the types of food to be accepted, whether or not there will be payment in that. That's all up for the negotiation between the person that is collecting the food and the person that is donating the food. And nonprofit organizations don't have to participate in SB 1383. It's a voluntary program. But if they do want to participate, there is a few requirements from them. They are required to maintain records of how much food is being rescued, who's it being rescued from. And they are not required to accept all donations, so that prevents what's called donation dumping. Jurisdictions have a lot of requirements. They are required to educate all the tier 1 and tier 2 generators. They're required to connect them to different food recovery organizations so that they can start a food recovery program. They're required to keep a list of all of the different nonprofits that are in their area that might be able to accept edible food. They're required to increase the access, which also includes increasing capacity of these nonprofit organizations to have the ability to rescue more food. So that's going to be an interesting development. And they're also required to monitor the compliance for all of the food generators that they are donating food. Food generators just need to keep a list of all their contracts or written agreements that they have with the nonprofits that they're donating to. Jurisdictions can fund the programs or work with waste haulers to fund it. They just need to provide a list for where the generators can donate their food. And also they have to have a proven track record of being able to accept that food as well in a safe way. It has to be safe food that's donated to, by the way. Enforcement and inspections will start in 2022. Enforcement starts in 2024, where they can actually fine the food waste generators for not complying. They cannot fine nonprofit organizations. That's something that a lot of people were worried about. And by 2024, they're going to have to inspect and enforce all the tier 2 generators. And they can also contract with health departments, which I know there's some people from health departments here too. So with that being said, I'm going to invite some really great food nonprofits to the stage. Everybody's here. All right. Well, this is going to be a great presentation. Ann will be our moderator for today, and I would love to have you take it away.
Thank you, Allison. This is an amazing event today, and it's great to see so many people here. And, as Michelle said a moment ago, part of what we want to do is make this a whole lot easier for all of us. And so it's going to be great to have these panelists today, and hopefully we can speak to some of that. So I'm Ann Zald. I'm a food rescue and recovery consultant here in Los Angeles. What I'm going to do is introduce each of our panelists. You guys should feel free to jump in if you have anything to add. And then we'll launch into some questions and have a conversation for the next half hour about these topics. I would just like to say to anybody listening in, there is a Q&A button, not the main chat. There is a Q&A button, and we will try to get to questions. Might be at the end. We'll just see how it goes. So Nancy Beyda. Nancy is the executive director of Food Cycle, which is an LA-based food recovery nonprofit that picks up food from grocery stores, restaurants, farmers markets, and factories and delivers it to organizations feeding people. They've worked to introduce innovation and create systemic change in the food recovery space in order to find better ways to connect excess food to hungry people. Then Sherry. Sherry Bonnano is the executive director of the Hollywood Food Coalition, which has provided hot, healthy meals to unhoused and food insecure neighbors 7 nights a week without fail since 1987, using only rescued food. In addition, they meet other basic daily needs, including clothing, medical care, and access to providers for housing and employment. The Food Coalition added its community exchange program in 2020, which is a food sharing concierge service aimed at providing small to medium-sized nonprofits with the food they need when they want it so they can focus on their missions. And then by default, Amir, wave Amir. I'm trying to break this, this thing we're in since we can't be close to each other. So that's why I'm asking all of you to wave. Amir Zambrano is currently the managing director of programs for Food Forward, overseeing its 3 recovery programs, volunteer program, as well as agency relations. He's been with Food Forward since 2013 and has worn many hats during his tenure there. Food Forward is a Southern California organization on a mission to reduce food waste and increase access to healthy fruits and vegetables through food recovery. So before we get started, I would just like each of you to add one more thing to what I read off a page. I'd like to know what region of Southern California you guys work in. Are you City of LA, County of LA, all of Southern California? Just like a little bit more information about where you operate. So Nancy, why don't you start?
Sure. I would say that one of the things that has been an important takeaway of the past year or so is understanding that the food systems don't have a clear designated border. So we do work throughout Southern California area right now, out east into the eastern reaches of Los Angeles County and sometimes down into Orange County. But we're primarily focused in Los Angeles area, the greater Los Angeles area, all the way from the San Fernando Valley, the West San Fernando Valley down into the South Bay area.
Great. Sherry, do you want to chime in next?
Yeah, somehow I've lost my video part. I'm trying to get it back, but you can all hear me, correct?
And we can see you.
Oh, well, I can't see you, but thank God you can see me. I don't know. So the Hollywood Food Coalition, in opening up its exchange, is rescuing food throughout the county of Los Angeles and serving nonprofits throughout the county of Los Angeles. We really believe that one of the issues that interferes with efficiency in terms of getting food around is having artificial boundaries that impair the ability to, work across different spas and different cities. So I think that's one of the things we've been focusing on. How do we address that in a better way?
Right. And Amir, can you unmute yourself?
Yep. Yes, good morning, everyone. Nice to see all of you. So Food Forward actually, originally was very San Fernando Valley focused as we started with our Backyard Harvest program. But since that have really expanded operations, even beyond Southern California. So we definitely go as far south as San Diego, as far north as Tulare County now, and extend through our wholesale program. Have started, some distributions, or not. We don't do the distributions ourselves, but are getting as far east as Oklahoma, Florida, and I'd say New Mexico as well. And so the kind of the touch that Food Forward now has, mostly as a result of the pandemic and kind of the huge influx of food, made it so that we were able to reach out as far as that. But I'd say, 80% of what we do is in the Los Angeles County metro region, and Santa Barbara and Ventura as well.
Thanks, Amir.
Sure.
So let's launch in with our first question for today. And I'm just going to ask whoever's comfortable starting, and then, hopefully we'll hear from everybody. You guys can dialogue, with each other. You don't need me to pass it back and forth. but I will if I need to. So a general question to start. Cities and counties have been aware of SB 1383 for a little while, and then it's more recently getting on the radar of edible food generators and large recovery organizations, and finally now to some of the smaller organizations. So when you guys, all of you are pretty big and important players in the space, and very accomplished with track records, when you look at the intent and the requirements of 1383, what's your initial reaction? And when I say what's your initial reaction, that could be things you think are great about it, things you think are not so great about it, or things that are going to be really doable, not doable. What are the opportunities that you see here? So any part of that you would like to discuss is fair game here.
Yeah, I think that we are living in very exciting times. Actually, there's that Chinese curse, right? Like, may you live in interesting times, maybe that as well. But there are a lot of challenges I think that we're all facing as we look towards implementation of SB 1383. And I feel that this is an opportunity for us in California to demonstrate leadership, to think outside the box, to come up with some solutions to issues that are global issues. So in that way, it's really exciting. And I feel that some people are a bit frustrated by the kind of vagueness of SB 1383. In some ways, there's a lot that's not been clearly defined in terms of implementation as the jurisdictions look at, like, what exactly are we supposed to do? And I believe that that's actually an opportunity, that since we're doing something that is very groundbreaking, that it is a way for us to find best practices. So when I see a group like this coming together, it is going to be really rethinking. It's an opportunity to rethinking the system. And the food recovery system has a lot of gaps that are allowing for tremendous waste right now, and really just this crime that we have, that there are so many food insecure people with so much food getting thrown away. So I think it's in some ways the vagueness of not clearly defined deliverables, in some sense, like what is actually the enforcement going to look like? We don't know, right? I think it's leaving us room to maybe find some better ways to do things as we go along, and actually have sort of evidence-based practices that grow out of our own efforts in the space. So that's.
Sherry or Amir, do you want to chime in?
Amir, do you have any thoughts? I agree with what Nancy said. So I think that I think this is, as we've been talking to different parts of the city, I think it's an opportunity to try and look at systems and models that can make things easier and better and more organized. I think that there really hasn't been a particularly good system in place. You have, as a food coalition, we were end users for many, many years, and now we created this sort of mid-sized hub and we're distributors. And I keep looking at, like, well, how do we make this better rather than having everybody run around trying to find small or large donations depending on their capacities and their abilities to recover the food and to use it. So I think that this is the opportunity to try and build a model that might be able to make it all work better.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, in terms of like the intent and the idea and the fact that we are moving in this direction, they're all bright spots. And there's something to look forward to and create a lot of opportunity. I think, Nancy, to kind of echo your point on there's a lot of vagueness, or I was looking at the bill last night and kind of looking for, like, things along enforcement and how do we get people to actually do this, and the donors. We work with huge distributors who are doing it on their own, and believe in, a lot of the large distributors that we work with, they also don't want to see that food go to waste, right? But I think there's also another side to that story once we start pushing out these these bills and these regulations where people kind of like pull back, because now the formality of it, the additional record keeping becomes a strain, not only for the distributors who are better resourced, I think, to handle it, but then also smaller partners that we deal with, smaller agencies, smaller food recovery organizations, like that becomes a resource constraint. And so, I think how we figure out how we can all collaborate, I think, with Allison's app, and there are a few others out there, like things like that, kind of poking holes and allowing us to do things, streamline things in a better way. That those are some of the answers, definitely. But there is a struggle, I think, in terms of making these requirements and who they're being, who's forced to report what.
So
Right.
I think that goes back to establishing a model about how it's all organized. So just commenting on of the three organizations here, you guys have been primarily distributors, where the Food Coalition had been primarily an end user. So we would be able to speak to that small organization and reporting efforts and things like that. What we've learned, and as we've opened up our exchange and our distribution period, is like, we think that it's really valuable to have, mid-sized hubs throughout the city. So because we work with other distributors also, just like everyone here does, that would then work with the smaller end users to hopefully remove the reporting requirements from them. So you have the people that have the infrastructure to be able to do those reporting requirements. In addition, one of the things that keeps coming up with the end users is that their capacity to actually get the food in amounts that they really need and are usable is challenging. So that's why having mid-sized hubs or a transportation issue like Nancy has is useful, because you're removing some of that burden on them and making it easy for them to come and then get what they need from mid-sized hubs to use for their programs. So I think that's one of the things we have to really talk about, is like, how are we going to organize, if there's going to be an influx of food coming in, how do we organize it so that we don't have necessarily to put the burden on smaller organizations to scramble around to try and find it, and to not find the food, especially since tier 1 is going to be the group coming out first. None of those are going to be necessarily small donors. I mean, the grocery stores right now are small because they're very inefficient and they don't really care about it. And then there's going to be some kind of penalty, they'll start caring about it. But until that happens, they're not going to care about it. So that still remains a decent place for a small organization to have a grocery store that they go get. But for large food providers and producers, and for the other group in the tier 1, which is going to be government organizations and places like that, hospitals, and are making food and donating, those are going to really not be ideal for the small end user. So you have to really look at what is the ideal organizational structure for getting the food, and where does it go so that small organizations can access it.
Right. And I think that it's, this idea that we're all going to have to collaborate and share resources is something that's very important going forward, because part of the problem is that the food recovery space has grown out of addressing hunger needs. And most of the smaller organizations are here because they are feeding hungry people, which we do as well. However, what's changing is introducing the climate change aspect of what we do into the conversation. And so it doesn't make sense for us, every small organization, to get additional refrigeration if, for instance, there's refrigeration that can be shared, or everybody get a new refrigerated truck, because when you start doing that, you're offsetting the climate impact that of the recovered food and the benefits, and you're adding more greenhouse gases. So everything, it's sort of changing the way we think about the system. And I think the biggest change is that we have to work together. And, and to start being collaborative, to not come from this kind of fear-based idea that there's not enough to go around, or that, if I share with someone else, it takes away from me. I think it's a mindset that really needs to shift to address this very, critical, crucial moment we're in terms of global warming, climate change, and also the amount of food insecurity that we're facing right now. That's going to continue, I think, rippling from the pandemic as the moratoriums on eviction are going away. The pandemic and its impacts on people have not passed at this point. It's going to continue to impact a lot of people in this city.
So you guys are talking a lot about shared infrastructure. You've talked about refrigeration, you talked about transportation, you mentioned hubs, which I know we are going to be talking about later today. You talked about cooperation between different groups. Just throwing some out there, do you see shared staffing as something that might be considered?
I think anything could be on the table. I guess it's really thinking it through how it would work.
Right.
And one of the exciting things that I think is coming up now is that the RAND Corporation is going to come in and do a real evaluation of the food recovery system in this area. And I think that'll be really helpful to have a think tank kind of going like, what are all the possibilities, and really examine them and to come up with some suggestions based again on kind of a real evaluation of what could be done. And you really want to think outside the box. Could staffing be shared? How can resources, how can funding be directed fairly to these small organizations where, yeah, you can't give everybody a truck because it's not going to make sense, but how do you have an equitable way of determining where does funding go? And I think those are important questions that having an organization like RAND sort of study could be really helpful for us all.
Right. So we've been talking a bit about how this impacts food recovery agencies, but we also know that some of the cities and jurisdictions, counties, et cetera, are jumping into the space as well and trying to create their own programs. So what programs, or how should we think about what cities might create that would be complementary to what an existing nonprofit is already doing? So would you complement what you're doing as opposed to competing with you?
Go ahead.
Well, I do want to throw one quick thing out there. I think I have more to say on the subject, but definitely one of the things, in Food Forward's wheelhouse that we have looked at and are starting to look at, I think where cities, municipalities, townships can be more involved is really like in that farmers market space. It is a huge, like there is loss there in those spaces in terms of food waste, and we're talking about grade A, almost straight from the farm produce. And even for an organization of our size, or I guess maybe because of an organization of our size, being at all of the farmers markets in LA is impossible. And we do see it as something that we think the cities and municipalities can get involved in, and making that, that would be an awesome thing to have as a requirement for the city to incorporate into its thoughts as it hands out permit. Is there a kind of a sustainability loop that is happening within those environments? How do you address food recovery in those spaces, and can it be something that is more mandated? It happens, absolutely. There is always, there's a church, there's a small organization that's picking up, but for that to be part of the initial plan of like, not only are we going to provide a market in this area, but this is how that market is a closed loop in terms of the waste that it produces. So I think that is one kind of, from our perspective, a glaring kind of like hole in the system.
So city permitting, what's required up front.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not even sure what programs the city's trying to create that would be working in the food recovery area. I think that one of the things that I don't know if this should live in the city, one of the things that is a huge issue is how do you educate the producers, or the people who, like grocery stores, which are not a producer, but to understand what they have to do, and to have them set up systems within their own businesses that would allow for recovery of food. So I don't know if the city can play a part in the educational role. That has been, I think, a big gap that's happened. And especially if they're going to be requiring it through this law, I think that that would be a huge benefit to food recovery organizations.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very important that the cities and municipalities understand the way the space works, and some of the sort of issues that need to be addressed, especially when they're considering funding. And one of those is the fact that food recovery needs to be very carefully organized so that the food, you couldn't just give, say, a small food bank that feeds people once a week. If you're going to give them a lot of money and then they're not going to actually be able to distribute recovered food effectively, because that recovered food has to be picked up and almost distributed daily. You know, like what you pick up on Monday is not going to work for your food bank on Saturday. So the cities, I think, also have to look at the actual distribution of this food when they're funding, and realize that that's why we're talking about collaboration and a network, because directly giving it to a food bank that can't actually use it on a really timely manner, it means that you have to almost open out the spaces that you're looking at. Like a particular city might not have food banks within their boundaries that are serving the food in a way that it can be used immediately. And if it's not, then it's going to go to waste on the other end. So another thing is there's this hidden waste that has to be addressed, where you have to have, composting and some of the things that are going to be discussed at the breakout tables. But if you don't look at the logistics of food recovery and you start funding people that can't use it immediately in the way it has to be used, then it's that lack of understanding of the system is going to create a lot of waste also.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, I think that's the advantage of a hub model, which is each one of those hubs is supposed to really understand who their end users are and how many people they serve, how often they serve, what kind of food they need, and how much they need. And the goal would be to distribute to them in a way that is efficient for whatever their program is. So they're not just getting stuff in huge volumes and having to compost it at their end. I mean, as an end user, that used to happen to us all the time. People would say, I need to place this food someplace. And we'd get all sorts of stuff that in amounts that were like, we couldn't use, or the type of food we couldn't use. And we were always trying to find another user for it, or we'd have to compost it ourselves. So the goal is to sort of fix that part of the process.
Right. And there are different models. There's transportation models that address that. There's hub models that address that. And I think it's really looking at a combination of those that's going to be the key to succeeding.
Yeah.
Right. So you guys have posed so many different thoughts that we could go in 100 different directions right now in terms of threads to follow up on. And I know we only have a few more minutes. So I want to ask you guys how you see this really impacting relationships with food generators going forward. You have current relationships that have operated sometimes in certain ways for a very long time. There will presumably be new relationships forming because new organizations that have never had to do this before, not organizations, but businesses have never had to do this before, are going to need to step up and participate. So it's a broad question. It can be, how do you think it's going to work? Or what are the opportunities, or what concerns you? Any part of that interests you?
Well, for me, one of the big barriers and gaps that we have to address right now, and it comes from on the food generator end, is we're expecting an influx of donations, and we have to create infrastructure that's going to spread those out to all the smaller organizations that we want to serve. But right now, there are also some barriers that in place in terms of all the grocery store donations that could be available and should be opened up to being recovered. What's happening currently is that grocery stores on the corporate national level are signing agreements. They're creating programs on a corporate level that actually their local store then has maybe one partner through Feeding America that's picking up once a week, and doesn't have the capacity to pick up daily to all, and pick up all the produce and things. So I think one of the issues that needs to be addressed as far as on the donor level immediately is opening up to better match so that all perishable foods can be picked up regularly, and we don't have stores saying, oh, we're donating already. But if you look at what they're donating, once a week canned goods, and the people who are dealing with their perishables are throwing them away on a daily basis. So that's something that I think needs to be addressed immediately for SB 1383 to work.
Yeah, I think that's where the education part comes in. I mean, we went and talked to Whole Foods the other day to see what they were being able to do as a grocery store. And at the corporate level, they want things done. At the operational level, they're overwhelmed by what they're having to do, and they're like totally not interested in dealing with it. So somehow the education portion has to happen, and it has to be made a little easier for them to do.
Yeah, and we've created a lot of materials that we are happy to share as far as training donors. I mean, we're kind of finalizing our packages, but it's very, like posters and signage and things to help stores get on board and understand how they can do this without it being too overwhelming. So we're always happy to share with anyone.
Right, Nancy, that raises an interesting point, because on the one hand, one wants information to be consistent, and yet you're creating things. I'm sure other people are creating things. Some of these generators are going to be having, and already do have, multiple organizations they're supporting. So what's going to happen if they get things from lots of other people? Do we need to pull that all together?
And real quick, we just have a couple of questions in the Q&A before we move on to the next topic at 10 a.m. Sure. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
So a couple of people were asking specifically about how will this differ from the Extra Helpings program of the LA Regional Food Bank, or will this affect those programs? Now, LA Regional has its own programs, but we're all being asked to participate. Is there an impact on those programs specifically that would differ for anybody?
Well, I think those programs need to be integrated into the greater food recovery efforts in the region, because in some ways those programs might have the kind of role that I mentioned, where they're a food recovery program where a donor's checking the box and saying, I'm recovering, but they aren't being recovered on a daily basis. So I don't think we would ever want to have those programs be, impacted in a negative way. I think the goal would be to open up to collaborate more to add to those programs. If the organizations picking up don't have the capacity to pick up daily, we want to send someone there who can, even if it's to help that organization get food on the other days. So, it's not a question of taking anything away. I think it's a question of how do we expand what we're doing to make sure all the food that we know, anybody who looks in a dumpster at a grocery store is going to see that there is so much being thrown away right now, even with those stores that say they have a program in place. And that has to change, because the food that's getting thrown away is specifically the food that is producing greenhouse gases.
I think one of the other issues is oftentimes the feedback that I get from different people about some of the food bank boxes, for instance, is they're very structured in a certain way, and that lots of people don't really want what's in those boxes. And so there's waste from those boxes also. So part of the expansion of how you're going to help organizations that need, or again, end users, we're always looking at what those end users need, is that you're trying to give them a choice of what they need and how they want to, what kind of food they want, because how they want to use it for their populations. So I think that that's something that should be discussed about in a model. How can we build that better? That's what we try and do. I think that's what other organizations try and do when they have their participants come and get food from them. But yeah, so that's just part of the model that has to come.
Yeah, and that's one of the benefits of having those smaller community distributions, be able to be a voice for what the people that they serve want and what they need and what kind of food they they actually would like in their box. And I wanted to address one of the questions in the chat, which is specifically ties in with that. I think that one of the ways that organizations that are kind of network builders like Hollywood Food Coalition or Food Cycle, or where we're distributing to a lot of smaller organizations, we help offset some of the things that are difficult for those organizations to do themselves, like weighing. There's a question about weights in here. That's the kind of thing, the weighing and tracking and providing donation receipts. I think that the organizations at this table, all of us play the role of doing that for these smaller organizations that are mostly staffed by nonprofit, by volunteers, and can be overwhelming all the administrative work. So that is a benefit of having a system in place that takes some of that off the smaller food banks, food distributions that really have a hard time, maybe even don't have the equipment that they need to weigh these donations or to pick up the donations.
Right. And I think we're going to be talking a little bit about weights later today, that there's a breakout for that as well. Somebody asks, we get food that's not usable. Of course, we've all experienced that. How can we help reduce that food waste? So certainly the regulations require no intentional spoilage, but you all get spoiled food anyway. Is there anything else we can do?
Well, I guess I think one of the hopes, I guess, that we have around these regulations is that, by virtue of there being a requirement to have to donate and to really look for that outlet, and that being, a mandate, I think enforcement is another, how tough that enforcement is a separate question, and probably a good motivator if it's a big enough stick. But with that regulation coming down, what we do expect to see is that distributors and folks, whether it's grocery stores or even smaller stores, that the onus of putting out that product sooner will be a byproduct of these regulations. One of the things that we face today is that people like to hold on to their product, because they want to sell it. It is their livelihood. It makes sense. But sometimes they hold on to things too long, right? And by the time that it gets to us, we've got a day, maybe hours to turn it around. And so that puts us in a bad position, both from the donor side to say, hey, sorry, we cannot take trash. No one's going to eat this. No one will eat that. And sometimes we get caught. Sometimes something gets snuck on in there, and that ends up happening where we then either end up with having to dispose of it ourselves or accidentally pass it on as well. And I think these regulations should help to some extent with that, because both the focus and awareness that it's raising, but ideally also that it is I guess ultimately an advantage for them to say, hey, we need to push this out. There is a concerted effort to do this.
And I think that that's something that it will be incumbent upon cities to come up with, to realize that there is inherently going to be organics waste, and there need to be plans for some kind of organics waste disposal for these small nonprofits, or you're going to be saying you're offsetting greenhouse gases and you're going to be dumping it out on the other end of the food that couldn't be served.
So don't send it on the scenic route to the landfill.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's just two issues around with the question, we get food we don't need. So there's or can't use. There's the food that's beyond its usable date, and there's the food that they get that is just not what they want to use. So that was the sort of the dumping thing. So do we get a lot of some item that we don't know how to use, or we don't want to use, or whatever? And then that has to be dealt with too, because if they're going to get that, maybe they bring that into a hub and somebody else will want to use it. It'll be prepared some other way. But those are the two separate things, I think. And part of the first part is educating donors to say, no one's going to buy that when it's 2 days from expiration in your store. Just donate it now.
Right.
Well, I thank you guys, everyone, for these really thought-provoking discussions. And I hope that we can continue all of these discussions at our breakout tables later. We are a little bit over time, so I'm gonna pause this table and just thank you everybody for your time.